Hello, Wilmington. My name's Jane Giles, and I'm the co-director of Scala, or the incredibly strange. I'm not going to be able to remember the title now. It's too long.
I'm Vic Roberts, former Scala usher and now a Wilmington dweller.
Hi, my name is Erika Arlee. I'm a co-founder of Honeyhead Films. We're a boutique female-led production company based in Wilmington.
Yay. And I'm Alex Toribio. I'm the programming manager at Cucalorus. So I'm going to start with you, Jane. How did you get involved with Scala as a programmer? And then what made you want to make a film about it?
Well, Alex, I started going to the Scala as a punter, as we certainly call them in England. I don't know what you call them in America, customer, maybe, an audience member back in 1981 when I was 16. And I carried on going to this fantastic rep cinema throughout my college years. And then in 1988, I was very lucky to see a job advert for programmer at the Scala. And I knew the program really well. I knew their collection well. So that's how I got the job. And I was programmer at the Scala. I think people call it curator these days, but we definitely called it programmer back in those days. I was there from 1988 to 1992. The Scala stayed with me for many reasons, for many years. And in 2018, I wrote a book, a very big book, which is lurking behind me, based on the monthly programs of the Scala, of which there were 178 from 1978 to 1993 when it closed. And as the book was coming out in 2018, it was suggested to me that it might be a good subject for a documentary. So it took me 5 years to raise some finance and get together a crew of people, and the film came to Cucalorus Film Festival in November of 2023.
Yeah, awesome. And Vic, do you want to share how you got involved with Scala?
Well, yeah, I was a 18-year-old. I just moved to London and I was going to university. And my girlfriend at the time knew the then programmer and said, you should get a job here. I needed to earn money. So I hadn't really seen much film. I think I'd probably seen like The Sound of Music and The Wizard of Oz and those kind of things prior to that moment. And then I got a job as an usher at the Scala, and which was very eye-opening for a very naive 18-year-old from the countryside. And I joined in 1987, just the year before Jane, and I left, I think, at the end of 1991.
Well, I love that you both got involved as teenagers. I think that's so fun. Um, so the response from film screenings, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, when we made the documentary, it was suggested to me on more than one occasion that there would be a very limited group of people who would be interested in a film about the Scala, a documentary about the Scala. Almost certainly only those old white straight men who went there between 1978 and 1993. And I knew that actually the audience was much, much, much wider than this stereotypical idea of who the fanboys were at the time or who the fanboys are now. I knew that there were people of all colours, all ages, and all genders who went to the Scala. But what I didn't know was that the film would communicate and travel to people in other countries. So the response was great. We sort of knew when we were making the film that we had something rather special, just as when we worked at the Scala, we sort of knew we were working at somewhere rather special. But you don't really know what you got until you start sharing it with an audience. So having worked on the film for a couple of years and editing it rather slowly, we had our first test screenings and were really blown away by the response. But it was a sort of friends and family screening. And it wasn't until our film started like being seen by people in other countries. And we noticed that there were two types of people that came up to us afterwards. And one was a sort of teary-eyed 50, 60-year-old straight white bloke in a faded Scala t-shirt, gently mopping his eyes and very moved by the experience. But the other, again and again, were young women in their early 20s who came up and just grabbed us and said, wow, that was amazing. That really makes me want to be more involved in film. But not really in filmmaking, more in programming, exhibition, distribution, archiving. That was the sort of responses that we were getting, and that was so exciting for us.
Yeah, I will say it just shows how much we are, as women, we're driven to view the world through the male gaze. It didn't really occur to me until the film came out just how female the Scala was. I mean, with the programmer and the manager at the time when I was working there were both women. A lot of the ushers were women, and the audience was full of women. And that, for me, the building itself was also female. And it hadn't really occurred to me because I'm just so used to seeing things in this, especially in a male-dominated industry like filmmaking. I was just seeing through this male gaze, and suddenly my eyes opened. I thought, oh my God, what an incredibly female place. And no wonder I felt so safe there.
Nice. So Erika, I know that you saw Scala at Cucalorus Film Festival. Can you touch on how it made you feel when you were watching it and afterwards?
Oh man. Well, there were a lot of compounding emotions that I had when I was watching it because the 2023 Cucalorus was the same Cucalorus where we premiered my first feature film, A Song for Imogene. So just being on the festival circuit and then coming and seeing films about places like Scala, it just reminds you how important these havens for cinema, specifically independent cinema, and for different voices are. And I particularly experienced that on the festival circuit. And just a gratitude as some of the bigger festivals become a little bit more corporate, a little bit more commercialized, and kind of geared towards celebrity instead of true independent cinema. I was profoundly moved by the documentary because I was like, this is what it's about. I was like, this is like these types of environments, and this is how films can bring people together, and the types of environments that they can create are so powerful, and people coming together around cinema and celebrating just different voices that aren't necessarily mainstream, I think is just so important. And I love seeing women at the forefront of that and doing that for their, not just a female community, but an all-inclusive community, and being radically inclusive in that capacity, the way that you can challenge people in a safe space, and celebrate people in a safe space. So I think that's something I particularly walked away with.
Yeah, definitely. I know just personally after watching it and being a part of Cucalorus, like in Django's Playhouse, oh, I got all these ideas like, oh, we need to do an all-nighter, and like we need to have a porn film festival, and like it just got me really inspired. So yeah, I can definitely relate to just like the atmosphere and making a safe space and really opening conversations up with the community.
It was a real dream come true for us to come to Cucalorus. It's such an amazing festival. I knew that, but I didn't know just how great it was until I hit the ground and met the other filmmakers and saw the rest of the program and started attending the screenings of short films. And to be in Django's was just perfect. It was the most fantastic fun, I think, that we've had on the festival circuit. And believe me, we've had a lot of fun on the festival circuit. So yeah, it's a great environment, really. It must be a wonderful place to work.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. Erika, did you feel like you got a different kind of like, so Jane, you talked about how you weren't sure who was gonna relate to the film afterwards, and you were surprised by the reaction from female and non-binary.
Sort of yes and no. I mean, my background is, as you know, in film programming in exhibition, but most of my career was spent being a distributor. And I knew that even that some films can have a very niche subject matter, but can still break through in terms of that appeal. I mean, you think about something like Nicolas Philibert's documentary Être et Avoir, which is about school children in the south of France. You just say, oh, you know, what do I care about that? But it's universal. So we knew that, we being the producers, my co-director, myself, that we had to make a film that had a universal appeal. So we looked at our subject matter thematically, and so that's why the documentary doesn't really play out like a sort of standard arts documentary. It's much more sort of kaleidoscopic and expressionistic. What we wanted to do was communicate to the audience what it felt like, what it feels like to be sort of 15, 16, the age when you probably start discovering culture outside of your family upbringing for the first time. And it's quite often transgressive material that you're looking at, because that's what teens are into, right? They're looking for, you know, something different from the supportive, hopefully, and maybe overbearing, you know, sort of environment that they're being kept safe in. They're trying to break out, and the Scala provided that. So that's why our interviewees talk about, like, you know, what it felt like, what it smelt like, you know.
Yeah, it was more of a vibe. Erika, you went to a film festival out of the country. Did you feel like you also got a response that was universal, like people could take the message away from your film?
Something I love about European audiences is that they're fine to sit with something that's a little bit more paced. Or at least that was our experience. Was like a character-driven drama that's a little bit of a more traditionally, I will say, not, I don't want to say slower paced, I want to say a more traditionally paced film. You know, I find that American audiences, they want all those cuts, they want to like be stimulated right away, they want that like flashy hook. And I find that you know, folks from outside of the States are often more patient with cinema, and they enjoy the patience of silence, and kind of lingering and performative moments and things like that. So our film definitely, I think, fit that audience really well. When we were in Croatia, a lot of people really enjoyed things about it that were, you know, might make it less of like a mainstream film, as far as lingering in long takes and really focusing on conversation and just character development rather than you know, really plot driven moments. So that's something that I love. And I'm from a theater background, so I've been a big Shakespeare nerd my whole life and like always loved the live theater. And I spent a summer abroad in London my freshman year of university, and that was such an impactful experience for me. And so I agree that these, like when you're in those like teenage to early 20 years, having pivotal experiences that really open your eyes to maybe things you haven't seen before can be so impactful and important. And those are some of the people I remember, like mentors or experiences from like that stage of my life. I just remember so well. It's like you're so imprintable and ready for that sort of thing at that age. So I think that, you know, knowing that a lot of the people who attended the Scala were in that kind of age demographic, I think what an amazing place to be able to go and like explore yourself as much as everything else, you know, exploring the cinema, exploring the culture, but really exploring yourself and saying, okay, this is maybe how I've been reared, but what really makes me feel colorful and what makes me feel expressive. And, you know, okay, so I have like thoughts and feelings about art or how I want to express myself, and I'm not alone. Those like teenage and early 20 years can be isolating. We work with a lot of university interns and students that are like making that leap from school into their careers as film professionals. And it can be a really kind of dissonant and terrifying space to live in because you're like making this real leap into the world. So having spaces and mentors and places where people can feel in community and like they're not alone in the big bad world, I think is really important.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna switch gears just a little bit. So because the event, we're also having Female Trouble and John Waters. So I kind of want to hear, what was it like interviewing John Waters? Like, had you have met him before, Jane?
I had met John briefly before. John was hugely supportive of the Scala cinema from its early days back in 1978. It was one of the first cinemas that was showing John Waters films, which came a little late into distribution in the UK. We didn't really have a midnight movie scene, but we did have a sort of burgeoning cult movie scene that was driven by its punk and its art school audience as well. And John really fitted into that whole slot. So he was like a friend of the Scala. But by the time we came to make our film, we were so aware that John gets asked to do a lot of things because he's such a great speaker. He's so funny. He's so beautiful and charismatic and such a great artist and so rude. And everyone loves him to bits. So we had to find the right moment to do the interview, which was the film was made during lockdown. So although we interviewed people in the Scala as soon as lockdown opened up a little bit, and filming could start again, we took advantage of the sort of what we're doing now on Zoom to do our overseas interviews with, and there were a number of them. We interviewed people, John in San Francisco, we interviewed people in New York, in Paris, and the online technology really made it possible for a very low budget film like ours to do this. We sent a professional local camera person round and we asked the questions over Zoom because we wanted to present a sense of a crowd, not of just like 3 people who ever went to Scala. We wanted it to feel like too many people. It's a bit like that scene in the Birds, the Hitchcock film, where it starts off with one bird and then there's another, and every time she turns around and then there's like millions of them. I find that kind of like surging of the crowd really moving. We also wanted to represent diversity in the audience. Like I mentioned before, the funders were like, oh, it was just old white straight men that went there, and it wasn't. And we had to really kind of prove this. That's why we look to have a diversity and a balance of interviewees. Also, the people that work behind the scenes in the film, the composer is a Black man, and so is the animator. So we were definitely very much aware of looking to make a production that wasn't all of the same kind of like, race, gender, socioeconomic class.
Did this spark a desire to continue making projects together? Or do you feel like there would be a follow-up, or are you in love with your own pursuits at this point? Or I'm so curious about the collaboration and what that was like for you.
This is my first film and I'm 60 years old, right? So, I mean, it's a bit late to have a kind of career change for me. My co-director's about 10 years younger than me, and he's much keener than I am to make documentaries about different subjects. For me, I think the really important thing is to play out the legacy of the Scala for as long as I can. Of course, I've got other interests and I do other things in my life, but this documentary started life as a sitcom, actually, as a television sitcom, and we couldn't quite get the script to stick. So we decided to do a documentary as a kind of proof of concept. So it may well be that we go back to the idea of Scala as a sitcom. I think you can imagine Vic Roberts as a great sitcom character.
That was fun.
But it wouldn't be with me directing it, I'd probably exec it rather than direct it. This is absolute heresy, particularly to say to a filmmaker, but I don't particularly like filmmaking. I'm an exhibitor and a distributor. I'm not really a filmmaker.
Equally an important part of the process, though, what you do. I think there's so much like mystique for the people in like, production and movie, the directors and things like that. They're like, I mean, I'm experiencing all of that for the first time, the pre-sale and the distribution of it all and all of that. So
See, that's what we should talk, Erika, because that's the bit that I absolutely love. The thing that I also wanted to say before Erika needs to rush off is about the fact that while I was looking for diversity in the interviewees and in the crew, the thing that was really difficult to achieve diversity in was the on-screen movie clips, because there simply weren't films made by women in the 1970s and the 1980s. They were hen's teeth rare. But it's so exciting now that, you know, as well as Mary Harron, we have, you know, Beeban Kidron, obviously, she's just great. The director of To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, but also Bridget Jones, Edge of Reason. That's a Beeban Kidron. And then other people that we didn't manage to get into the film that we knew were in the audience, Sam Taylor Johnson, Carol Morley, Sophie Fiennes, and I mentioned Viv Olbertine. So I'm not saying they're legion, but it's certainly easier now as a woman to make a film than it was in the 1970s and the 1980s.
Absolutely.
I kind of want to touch, Vic, on your experience at the Scala, and I had two questions for you. There's a point in the film where I think you and Blair are on the couch in the back. Was that a reason for that? I thought it was so funny that that's the only time there was an interviewee and you guys were in the background.
I think it was either Arlee or Jane. We were just sitting there as it happens, but either Arlee or Jane said, actually, that looks, can't sit there. It looks good. You look good silhouetted at the back. Be quiet and don't move too much. So
I mean, creatively, we all, as well as the fact that it looked really great because Vic was wearing a hat and Blair's got that incredible hair, incredible profile. She also had incredible food poisoning during that shot. But the person that we were interviewing is Lisa Power. Lisa Power was one of the founding members of Stonewall in the UK. She was one of the early people on Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, as it was then called. So she is a gay rights activist, and she's just the most incredible person. We wanted to present Lisa as not alone, and that's why also we decided that it was a good idea to have Vic and Blair as a proud gay couple in the background.
Yeah, and it kind of gave it a feel of just the vibe of Scala, where people are doing different things and you can be in the same room and be comfortable.
it was such a holding space. And the audience was eclectic and wild and crazy and stoned and sometimes doing nefarious things. There was a gentility to the place, which is hard to express when you consider some of the films we were watching, but it was holding to be there, and so holding that two cats could happily and safely trot around.
What was the archival process like for this film?
Sure. Well, there's different types of archive. The movie clips are the movie clips. So we put those to one side for the moment. We were blessed by a particularly rich amount of non-fiction archive. There was a short documentary that was made in 1990 about the Scala for cable TV in the UK. And there's lots of that I licensed for the documentary. So we knew of the existence of that. And then very luckily, late into the process, I was approached by a fan boy of the Scala who told me that he had 1 hour of very rough and ragged video footage that he'd shot over a course of 3 years towards the end of the Scala's life. And he transferred it and he licensed it to us. So that was great. So all of the non-fiction archive, like the Spandau Ballet footage and the Margaret Thatcher, all of that is properly licensed in. It was impossible to license the movie clips in anything other than a fair dealt process. You probably know what fair dealing is. There are films like Lynch Oz, which is fair dealt. It basically means you set up an editorial framework that enables you to exercise your right of quotation from other works. So the programs existed as a complete collection. When the Scala closed in 1993, I kept everything. I kept a complete set of the paper programs. I kept my telephone, which is there in the film. You can see a bit of archive footage of me on the phone telling people the times of the latest John Waters film. I kept the phone numbers of all of the distributors and the print sources. Here it is, because we really thought we were going to try and reopen the Scala when it closed in 93. And actually that never happened for various reasons, but it meant that there was this archive of materials, paper materials, physical materials, and the chair that you see flipping up at the end, that's one of the Scala's original chairs, and we kept that too. So there was quite a lot to work with. I mean, we always knew that we wanted a film that was like 85 to 95 minutes long, because it gets quite exhausting kind of beyond that for a documentary unless it's very slow paced. We knew that we wanted something fast paced. We had to be really select in what we put into it, and it took a year to edit the film. Nearly drove me insane. But yeah, that's how we made it.
Yeah. Vic, so I know you were an usher, but you did way more, right? Being a staff member at the Scala was like you kind of did everything.
Well, yeah, I'd work, sometimes I'll sell tickets, sometimes I'd work in the cafe, but mainly I was an usher. But we didn't show anybody to their seats. Sometimes we showed them from their seats
Right.
to the exit. But so the seats weren't numbered in the Scala. It was first come, first served for wherever you wanted to sit. And then I'd be in the corner, usually with a cat on my lap and a flashlight in my hand, just to marshal anybody who wasn't behaving within reason and what was acceptable in the Scala. And pretty much everything was acceptable unless you disrupted the enjoyment of somebody else watching the film. So yeah, and we weren't allowed to smoke in the Scala, so I'd see someone trying to cover up the red end of the cigarette, and even I can smell it and I can see it, so I'd go marching up the stairs and put it out, no smoking. The guys that were ushers of the Scala would often have me throw someone out because I was a teenager and therefore I was fearless and thought I was invincible. And it was usually men that I was throwing out. And it was only, I think, maybe a couple of times. But a large aggressive man wasn't going to go near a small, feisty, fiery, angry little girl who's standing tits up against them saying, "You've got to leave now. You've got to fuck off or I'm going to do you in." So they go like, "Okay, well, whatever, I want to get away from this little creature."
Terrifying.
I want to hear about the programming of the performances, how that was a big part of the Scala as well.
In terms of the live acts, sometimes I program them, but more often I had collaborators, and you see some of them in the film, like Bal, the rockabilly guy who put on the psychotronic shows, and Rory, the guy with a very strong Northern Irish accent, who put on the nightclubs with live performers and movers. And they were sort of like the promoters who came in and put on their shows. So there was me as a programmer, there were guest promoters who kind of came and went and took a share of the box office and brought their own audience with them on top of the Scala's existing audience.
That's reminded me of an anxiety I used to have at the Scala because I'm dyslexic and I was also a teenager who only spoke English. And so, we'd show films with foreign titles, and I'd always be horrified if I was working in the box office and somebody phoned and asked me to tell them what was on, and I'd have to read this foreign title really badly. So that used to give me huge anxiety. But one day this bloke phoned up, and I was in the box office, and he said, "Oh, is La Belle et la Bête playing tonight?" And I went, "No, mate, it's Beauty and the Beast." And he slammed the phone down on me. I didn't realize that was the French name for Beauty and the Beast.
But I think, what's nice about that story is that in some ways it's atypical because the Scala audience and the staff were autodidacts. The Scala was set up by Stephen Woolley, who left school at 16, was running the Scala by the time he was 20. We were very young. Nearly everyone who worked there was very young and oftentimes self-taught. film studies only started in the, about 1978. So when I was a student in 1981, 82, it was a new thing. It was like the Wild West. There was no real canon. There was, a little bit, Hitchcock and Renoir and whatever, but it was very limited. It's nothing like what it spiraled into today. And I think that, that sort of lack of snobbery that was mostly there around the Scala was really important, that people, they did feel that intimidated in some other cinemas, like the National Film Theatre or the Everyman in Hampstead. You felt like you needed a kind of, master's degree to attend there, but the Scala was really kind of like open to everyone. It was like a sort of college for slackers that anyone could go to or not go to.
I think it's kind of like an original film school.
Yeah, I mean, the program was like a kind of curriculum. It was like a timetable that was offered up to you, only instead of everything looking really boring and overwhelming and difficult, it just looked really fun,
That really informed me and in part made me who I am today because of the films I was watching and the people I was watching it with and the people I was working with.
I grew up going to a library. We didn't really have that many books in the house. And so those people that I was meeting at that age, around 16, who had that incredible, and you were like, oh, yeah, you'd like Jack Kerouac, amazing. I mean, fancy reading that, or Charles Bukowski for the first time, or any of those writers. It's so exciting. And I think because it was like a sort of pilgrimage going to the Scala, people used to dress up to go there. I mean, not to the extent of the New Romantics that you saw in the Spandau Ballet footage in the early part of the Scala's life, but it was an occasion to go there. And you could obviously go looking however you wanted to look, but people would make an occasion of it. And it was really, really exciting to go, I think. And people brought their friends and it kind of like grew. And I think this is all part of what it was. It's a beautiful building, which you can see on the cover of the book. It was like a cathedral-like space, as one of our interviewees talks about. It was very emotionally, artistically, intellectually impactful. It was quite a big experience, quite a big deal. But I think you're right when you're talking about small spaces as well. A small space can have that effect on you as well, if it's got the kind of magic. And I think, place, obviously somewhere like Django's does have magic.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll just wrap it up there. I mean, I have so many questions. I just want to say, like, this really did inspire me a lot being a programmer here at Django's and Cucalorus. I did not know I would ever be in this job. And it really I just love it so much. And like the experiences and the things that I'm learning, like I love how you Vic talked about it being like film studies. I didn't go to film school, so just seeing the stories, knowing the storyline, but then also looking at the cinematography, like just so many things that I'm just learning from working here is really special. And I definitely felt that through the Scala. All right, so we are screening Scala at 6:15 p.m. March 21st. And then after that, we're going to have Female Trouble at 9 p.m. at Django's Playhouse.
And in between, we are going to go totally mental. We're going to eat filthy vegan hot dogs, trashy meat hot dogs. We're going to guzzle sexy cocktails. We're going to tussle our wigs, get trashed, and get chaotic.
So come one, come all, dress up, as the Scala used to say, wear a wig, show some respect, and have a lot of fun. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye. Bye both.